The scripture lesson for today is from the book of the prophet Jeremiah, the 36th chapter, selected verses. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, Jeremiah received this message from God. Get a scroll and write down everything I've told you regarding Israel and Judah and all the other nations from the time I first started speaking to you in Josiah's reign, right up to the present day. The king sent Jehudi to get the scroll. He brought it from the office of Elishama, the secretary. Jehudi then read it to the king and the officials who were in the king's service. It was December. The king was sitting in his winter quarters in front of a charcoal fire. After Jehudi would read 3 or 4 columns, the king would cut them off the scroll and with his pocket knife and threw them in the fire. He continued in this way until the entire scroll had been burned up in the fire. Neither the king nor any of his officials showed the slightest twinge of conscience as they listened to the messages read. After the king had burned the scroll that Baruch had written at Jeremiah's dictation, Jeremiah received this message from God. Get another blank scroll and do it all over again. Write out everything that was in that first scroll that Jehoiakim, king of Judah, burned up. So Jeremiah went and got another scroll and gave it to Baruch, son of Neriah, his secretary. At Jeremiah's dictation, he again wrote down everything that Jehoiakim, king of Judah, had burned in the fire. There were also generous additions, but of the same kind of thing. Here ends the lesson.
We will have one of our dialogue sermons. Because Augustine, we know you as a glamorous wife of Karl Lindskoog and a brave mom of 2 lively boys who I'm told, are watching through live stream right now and proud of their mom, Justice and Jean-Luc. But, that's how we know you here in church. But I happen to know that you are an accomplished professional woman. And so tell us about, what you do, what's your profession?
So I am a public school educator in the city, particularly special education. Currently, I am not in the classroom this year, but I've been teaching since 2007.
Yeah, so thank you. And it is important for us to know that because we are today talking partly about these kind of matters, about school books which are kind of banned from schools, hopefully not from our school districts or something like that. But before that, I also happen to know that as we celebrate Black History Month, your heritage is slightly different or probably even more painful and so I wanted to ask you, where are you coming from? What is your heritage, Augustine?
So I'm originally from the beautiful island of Haiti, born in Port-au-Prince.
Yeah, and there is, and we heard from Carl when he preached to us about half a year ago about that very, very sad, and for Americans also, we should feel seriously guilty about and remorse and do something about it. And I know that many people are trying, but that's not why we are here. Most recently, there was this really seriously sinister twist in a discourse in in our nation here in America about education, and parents yelling at teachers and at the school board meetings and so on, protesting what teachers are allowed to teach, and are already taking action. You know, there are like more than 150 legislations in 38 states trying to tell teachers what they are supposed to teach in schools. Like you know, or other teachers among us. It's scary. Did you come across any of that in your own school or school district, or?
I haven't come across that in the DOE, which is Department of Education, for those of us who may not have kids that are young enough to be in schools in the city. But I think what's important to note is that teachers actually just don't teach what they choose to teach. What's happening now seems to be a much more politicized, I guess politicians getting super involved in education to the point of banning things and all these, I think, ridiculous legislations. We have curriculum, right? We are told what we can teach. So it's not as though, you know, I decided, oh, yesterday I felt this way, so today I'm gonna teach this class in a particular way. That's not sort of how it works. And so I think some of the things that are going on in the country are reactionary, based on Black people asserting that their lives matter and that it's not okay to, you know, the response to that to be all lives matter. So those people, I think, who are in 38 states, you know, out of 50, that's just, it's super sad, I guess I could say, but it just kind of tells us where we are in this nation and how divisive things have gotten, where it's really a reaction to people who are really seeking the rights that everybody is supposed to have, right? That white Americans enjoy. We want to have those same rights, and us asserting our existence is seen as a threat. And so therefore, we need to make sure we start banning anything that says anything about Black people or people of color, and make it seem as though there's something wrong with what's already being taught. In actuality, we're not really teaching enough. And that's what like critical race theory is about, where it's really about making sure that we are inclusive in education. Because if we're, for example, I taught history for a few years, and I really was teaching, it was world history, but I was really teaching Western Civ, or Western European history. That's really what it was. And so to say that, for people to want to say, and educators who know better to say the history of Black people didn't begin with slavery, right? We weren't, you know, slaves, we were enslaved people. It's about changing the language and bringing equity and bringing justice to education, where we're not teaching myths to children, where we are teaching that white people are superior and Black people are inferior, right? We want to bring truth to education. And we do teach some of that history, but it's just the history that benefits the people in power. And we want to be able to bring like the knowledge and the truth to education, where I can say, you know, we can all be proud of who we are, and we can unify as a country, as a nation, as a people, and not just take people out of the history. Because then if I'm not present in the history, or immigrants are not present, Black people aren't present, Latinx people aren't present in the history, what that says is that we don't matter and we're not important, we had no contribution to the history, when in reality, that's actually very false.
Yeah, and it is sinister, like we can hear right now. It was in the media when Putin said that Ukrainian people are non-people and they don't have state legitimacy. And you see that it has real consequences. This is among the white people where they are. But it is the same thing. You know, I was actually surprised you mentioned that when I took my sons when they were in high school in Binghamton, and that was a good school district there. When I took their book of history book, and there was even very, very little about European history, not to mention, you know, ancient history is history of Africa, history of Asia, almost non-existent. It was really scary. And what you just mentioned early on really caught me. We are going off script now, but that was really, you know, so yes, curricula are important so that you are not forgetting something, but having teachers really like almost like an mechanical parrots teaching only. Didn't you go to college and didn't you study being a pedagogue or pedagogy?
I
Of
did,
course,
but
yeah.
the thing is, a politician somewhere has said to me that my degree and my license are not enough, and the fact that they've been elected based on certain opinions, their opinions are matter more than fact, and that's sort of what's happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, so be assured our Resistance Bureau is now contacting our school districts and are asking them to trust teachers. That's one thing. And also make sure that the books are not censored and supporting them in this struggle.
One of the things I can say about New York City schools, which I think is a beautiful thing, there's a real push for inclusion and a real push for diversity. Currently, I'm working in a district office this year, and part of what we are trying to do is, bring equity to education. And as we're training new teachers, it's to, have them understand that you are seeing kids in front of you in the city that come from different economic backgrounds, different cultures, varying spaces in the world. And it's important to acknowledge these students and just see them as real people and not really bring bias into your teaching, but really just recognizing all the children, no matter what color they are, their religion, where they come from, whether they are native New Yorkers or not, like seeing them as real people and as equal people, which I think is really very important.
Yeah, and that was with my teachers, that their heart was aflame for teaching. And opening our minds the best they could. And I think that is what you are describing as a goal for teachers. And I think that many teachers are like that.
Yeah.
And then there is, of course, these screaming parents. I think that there is a role for parents. But that's slightly different than the role of teachers. So, do you have any thoughts about it? You are a mom and a teacher at the same time.
Yes, I have lots of thoughts, Andrew. Where should we begin? Well, my thought on these people who are screaming and all of that, one of the things that I think, and as a parent and a teacher, is that for the first time, with the pandemic and people having to be at home with their kids, people are starting to sort of have an idea, parents having a little bit of an inkling of what it's like to teach a child, and they may have one or two, right? We are in classrooms of like 24, 34 kids, and I think the culture of individualism, where I care about me and mine only, is showing up in the screaming and all of the behaviors that we're seeing, because the idea is that no, my child is special and only my child is special. But as teachers, we see every child in our classroom as special, right? So we want to make sure that we're teaching every single student and not just, well, I have to only teach this kid because maybe their parent wants this thing this way, and so therefore the rest of the 33, you don't matter, I'm only teaching this way. And that's not what we do. So I think people having to take certain responsibilities for their children became overwhelming, right? So that's one, like, wait, I don't know how necessarily to teach my kid how to write a paragraph, and they need to be able to do this. And so there's anger or some resentment, and then, what was going on in terms of the protests all mixing in with that, then it's like, wait, you want to include this discussion? Because maybe it's not what I believe in, right? And I think some people have their certain values, and I'll just be frank about it. Like, if I'm a parent who is a racist and you're trying to talk about Ruby Bridges, I will feel a certain type of way about that. I will be angry about that. Why are you talking about Ruby Bridges? What are you trying to say about me? So I think there's certain levels of recognition that people have that, well, I am this sort of person, but I'm not really that bad. I don't really say certain things. I don't use the N-word or things like that. But I think this is all very reactionary as to what's happening in the country with, you saw a massive movement of Black people, white people, young people, older people, all together saying this is about time that we say Black Lives Matter and stop having a response to Black people being killed and murdered on camera over and over and over again be all lives matter. Because what are you saying in that case, right? If I say my life matters, I need you, my house is burning, I need you to send the fire department. And you're like, well, all these houses matter too, right? What are you really saying to me? It's okay that my house burns down because these other houses are okay? I mean, but think about it. If you have a fire, and I'll use a teachable moment here, I'll get in my teacher mode. If one house burns, right? And you allow that fire to rage on, it's gonna catch on the other house, and in the other house, and in the other house. And so what we're saying is Black people are an integral part of the fabric of the United States. And you can't dismiss that. And as you talked about, with burning the number 13, just because you burn it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? So we continue to exist, and we continue to resist, and so we will continue to do that regardless of, these people saying these things. And we've dealt with this for centuries, right? And I'll do another teachable moment.
Teach.
How many of you know about the Louisiana Purchase? If you've heard of it, raise your hands. Okay, good. So the majority of people. How many of you know that what Haitian independence was an integral part of the Louisiana Purchase? Okay. See, when I asked if you guys knew about it, I think almost everyone raised their hands, right? So when I asked about the Haitian connection to that, 4 people knew about it. So I'm gonna tell you what that was. So part of why our nation has grown beyond our 13 states, right? We've gone from the east all the way to the west in both oceans, right? With the Haitian independence brought about some financial hardships for the French, because Haiti was considered the jewel of the Caribbean. Haiti has gold, continues to have gold, diamonds, and all of these things and these natural resources that these European nations found very important. So Haiti was the epicenter. And sugar, all of these things that you could think about that were making money for enslavers, right? And those who supported slavery and were benefiting from slavery, they were making money through Haiti. So what happens is Haitian people fought hard and gained their independence. So in order for France, they no longer had this island now, right? That was a cash cow for them. And they no longer had that free labor anymore, right? So what they did was they needed to build capital. The way they tried to build one of the ways was to sell off the land that was the Louisiana Purchase. Without Haitian independence, the US would not have continued into those lands, into that territory. That, by the way, was Native American land anyway, right? So the French then sell it to the United States, and there you have the Louisiana Purchase. Later on, we go to war with Mexico because we wanted to take their land initially. Because when we talk about, Mexican people, when we make Mexican immigration into the United States as this dirty thing that we need to build walls, we were emigrating into their land undocumented. It was actually the other way around, right? And they no longer wanted all these American people setting up shop and basically taking away their land, and they tried to kick the American people out. Our response was war and saying, no, this is ours. Imagine if Mexico did that, right? If Mexican government or Mexican people said, you've taken over, you came, we welcomed you, and everything seemed fine, but now you're kicking us out of where we live and our homeland, so we want you to go, right? If they had done that and declared war on us because we're now in their land and displacing them, so we then went to war with Mexico. And so now we go all the way to the west, and all of these lands were Mexican lands. So when some people say, go back to Mexico or go back to where you came from, these people were there long before. That is their homeland. They were natives of that land. So the difference between somebody we may call Mexican or Native American is simply where we decided to politically draw a border, That's it. And so I think what the issue is, what I'm telling you is controversial because it's the truth. And some people don't want that truth. It's threatening because if my child can then be friends with a white child and a Mexican child and be friends with any child, an Asian child, and think about what our country could become if we're really telling kids the truth and building unity rather than separating children. Because race and the ideas about race and the negatives we place on race and the fact that we make white the default is a taught thing. This is not something that is, we grow up and we decide that, oh, I'm white and I'm black and you're Hispanic and you're this and you're Asian, you're that. Of course, children see differences in themselves, right? Oh, your hair is this color, my hair is this color. But when you're looking at kids, they don't really see a difference in themselves. They don't. They see each other as human beings until somebody else comes into their lives and say, oh no, this person's different. Oh, you can't really be friends with this person. So sometimes racism isn't just burning books, right? It's not just banning of the books. It's what you say, it's the microaggressions. It's the fact that you may be more progressive, but you go into a building and you work with black people and you say things like, oh, I don't see color. And it's supposed to mean well, but this person is a person of color. So if you don't see them, you're excluding them, right? And so I think we have these things and we don't teach this stuff and we don't teach, basically community building because it is threatening to people in power. You don't want to see the masses coming together and not seeing themselves as separate races and separate this and separate that, but fighting on real issues that really impact our nation, right? Because think about how threatening that would be to the very small number of people who control everything. If all the rest of us came together and said, wow, we really are the same in very many ways. We have more similarities. And I can tell you as a Haitian person growing up in the United States, you all really have a lot more in common than you think you do. And that has been my experience where people are like, oh no, we're so different. I'm like, you have differences, but the things that you have in common are so much more because at the end of the day, you're growing up in the same place. You're just choosing to exclude yourself. And so as sort of like having like an outside lens, it's really sad because I think about what this country could be if we actually built unity and we actually acknowledge one another and we acknowledge the things that we do wrong. It's okay to say, you know what, maybe I didn't enslave you, but my ancestors did, but this is how I continue to benefit from that. And you know what, I'm gonna be cognizant of this from now on, and I'm going to do things that will make your life better and my life better. Because we've learned biblically, and we, as Christians, we know if that our neighbor is suffering and we continue to move in a world where we're doing great, but we are suffering, but I'm maybe part of that suffering and my privilege is part of your suffering, but you know what? I'm not the person who did that to you. Is that really a Christian mindset to have? So, that's my teachable moment for you guys. And again, and I think these are the things that threaten people for teachers to tell the truth to children.
Thank you. No. And Prophet Augustine, we started about the burning books, and exactly like was the last sentence of that reading. Only this time, now, she had added much more. And so continue adding much more. Let us continue building that kind of society, at least in our congregation, like you described. Where we see color, but at the same time, we see it as a gift.
Amen.
And as a way to benefit everyone and support the weakest most and creating a different kind of community. I rather use the word community for church than society, but let us spread it out as well. Mm-hmm. And thank you very much for coming to us and talking to us and bringing this prophecy to us. I think it is important. And I'm very thankful for you having that courage. Augustine told me that she prayed about it before, and you clearly prayed, and your prayer was heard. So thank you very much for coming. And now we will continue with our affirmation of faith, which is prepared there and is from the brief statement of faith of PCUSA. We can then move it later, you know. Yeah. In a broken and fearful world, the Spirit gives us courage to pray without ceasing. Among all peoples, to Christ as Lord and Savior, to unmask idolatries in church and culture, to hear the voices of peoples long silenced, and to work with others for justice, freedom, and peace. In gratitude to God, empowered by the Spirit, we strive to serve Christ in our daily tasks and to live holy and joyful lives, even as we watch for God's new heaven and new earth, praying, "Come, Lord Jesus."